I mean, this is interesting because actually I am an academic, although the amount of time I spend on it at the moment is minimal, but I am at the University of Manchester. I'm a university research fellow for the Royal Society. And so in that guise, what am I interested in? I'm interested in making Britain a more scientific place. Why? Because 6.9% of our GDP comes from physics-based industry, for example, which is more than comes from financial services. So everybody accepts the fact, and Eric Schmidt made the point very well last night, that high-tech industry, knowledge-intensive services and industry is the jargon term. Those are the future, right? So, and that includes media, because that's a knowledge-intensive services industry. So how do you maintain that foundation? Now, I think my proposal is that the public service broadcasting has a very important role to play in, I suppose, changing the direction of a society. When you think about putting things into little silos and about giving people choice and allowing people to ghettoise themselves into the areas that they're interested, without almost this kind of Reithian ideal of very unfashionably and very bluntly saying, well, you don't necessarily know what's best for you, right? No, there's appropriate caveats around that, but you know what I mean. That to me is, that's very important. It's a very important context in the debate about where our media goes. I think it plays a big role in allowing change to happen. And if you allow people to ghettoise, you make it very difficult for change to happen. I mean, I've had this interesting, I have a lot of friends in the US, I discuss a lot, because those media stories about the upswing in science went across the Atlantic, and they were used by a lot of people in America to say, well, could this happen in America? How did Britain turn around this decline in science and engineering? How has it done it? And if you accept the fact it's the media, it almost can't be done in America because it's already so riven with the doctrine of choice, in a sense, that you don't have any national broadcasters, either public service or commercial, to get that audience. 10% of the population watching a science program does have the chance, there's a possibility that can make a difference.
You talk about it having turned around, but isn't there a danger as well that it'll end up like sort of cooking programs, where everyone wants to watch cooking programs, but actually when they do the research, it turns out that nobody's cooking, everyone might want to watch wonderful, beautiful imagery, you emoting about these extraordinary mysteries of the universe, but for us to move ahead in terms of science and engineering, it requires investment and attention from the government. It requires a change in school syllabuses, again, something that Eric Schmidt pointed out last night. There are so many other factors that need to be incorporated.
This is the key difference between cooking and science, is that science does, and the university sector as a whole in this area, underpins about half our economy. So it's a genuinely important question. The companies, the big companies in Britain, Rolls-Royce, BAE Systems, AstraZeneca, these are companies that require that throughput of scientists and engineers in order to underpin our economy.
So why do you think we're so apathetic why do you think we're so apathetic then about the subjects? Why do you think there aren't more young people going, I want to be an engineer?
That's the thing. There are now. So I think, it's obviously complicated, but I think there is a shift now, and I would contend that part of that is to do with particularly the BBC's commitment to science broadcasting. And I named some. There's a lot of it, and it's doing very well. And it's bang goes the theory as well. It's across all channels. It's important that it's across all channels, and it's a commitment. And then you ask yourself. And it's quite unfashionable, again, sometimes to ask these questions. You ask yourself, what is it like when you go into the BBC? So I'm not an employee of the BBC, in a sense, although I make programmes for them. So I go in, and you say, well, when you sit there in the science department, what is the motivation for these people? What are they doing? What's the conversation that I have with them about what programmes we should put on? And they're driven by a genuine desire to put good science on television. They're not driven by ratings. I mean, we tend to, from Janice Hadlow at BBC Two, always says to both myself and Andrew, I don't really mind. Honestly, and I believe her. I don't mind I don't mind whether you get 2 million people. I'd love it if you get 6 million, but I don't mind. Go and make the best program that you can. And that's kind of almost a cliche, but I think it's genuinely true in a world that is not subject to commercial pressure in the same sense, that you can have the freedom to experiment and to engage with this rather wider goal, in my view anyway. What
inspired you to go into the field of scientific endeavour? I mean, there wasn't a Brian Cox, there was a Carl Sagan, I suppose. But you know, now when students at conferences, when they've stopped screaming at your appearance, turn around and start asking the questions about, you know, how they can do it and so on, would you recommend a period perhaps as a pop star, just, I don't know, to sort of limber up? What do you say to them, and what do you think has made you the sort of phenomenon that you are?
I mean, in terms of what I say to kids, actually, and I always say this, the reason I've been able to make programs on television is because I went away and got a degree and a PhD, actually. So when kids ask me, how should I get into science broadcasting? I say, well, first of all, go and be a scientist. And that's actually very interesting. It's a big shift over the last few years in the media, that you look back and there was a nasty period, in my view, where you thought you have to have a celebrity to present this program, right? It's a celebrity doing a science program, a celebrity this and that. Actually, what's happened, if you look at the BBC's record, is that it's myself and Ian Stewart and Jamal Khalili and Adam Rutherford and Alice Roberts, academics. Right. So what a conscious decision was made to turn academics into television presenters, stroke celebrities, whatever you want. That's really important. And that sends a strong message, actually. It says that it's not like an X Factor message. It's the opposite in a way. It's like if you want to be on television, then be a scientist or be a historian or do that, and then you can go onto television.
Are the two roles complementary? Because I sort of imagine that on the one hand, in terms of your academic career, it's very much about looking for breakthroughs and finding answers. Whereas the impression I'm getting about the television programs is that it's more a sort of evangelical educational process for you, so that they would seem to differ in terms of what they take up of your scientific mind.
It's interesting that the scheme I'm funded by at the moment is a Royal Society scheme called the University Research Fellowship. And its job is to make scientific leaders by giving them freedom. And that really is. And in general, what happens is that you do that by having a very strong research career and just do that. But there is another strand to it, which is, what does it mean to be a scientific leader? Well, raising the profile of science in a democracy is not just a kind of a thing you need to do. It's not a luxury. It's not, well, it would be nice if people supported it. In competitive funding environments, as we've seen, if you want funding, government funding to universities and to research, you need public support for it. So it's actually not only about encouraging kids, it's actually saying this is what science does. This is what you have paid for as a taxpayer. This is why you should pay for more. And actually, one of the reasons I really became very interested in being on television and making programs was back in 2007, when I'd not done very much. There was a funding crisis in physics, which was caused, as far as anyone can see, by a mistake, a civil service mistake. I think we don't go into the details, but it looks like it was a mistake. But it resulted in a 20% cut in funding for physics and astronomy, so for PhD places, a big hit for no reason. There was no economic crisis at that time. The reason, as far as you can see, and I got very annoyed about it, was that government essentially thought that nobody cared. So they didn't really think, there's not going to be headlines about this, it's not a big deal. All right, we've made a bit of a cock-up, but it's all right, we'll just... Actually, that's now probably not the case. Probably now. If you said we're going to close Jodrell Bank, then I think there'd be a big public outcry about it, where that was spoken about in 2007, because you just thought, well, it doesn't really matter. I mean,
you talked about the importance of the BBC, and really it is pretty much only the BBC who could afford to make these huge epics, you know, with you being jetted from one side of the planet to the next. But is there a different way, a sort of guerrilla way of making science programs that perhaps other stations could be looking at in terms of capitalizing on the interest of the public, if that is actually there, and making a different style of program? Because yours is actually in the great grand tradition, isn't it, in many ways? And it is what the BBC does brilliantly. It's mesmerizing to watch, it's epic in every way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what other broadcasters do, given the viewing figures across the board for science seem to be very high at the moment. And as you rightly say, it's not just for these epics. I mean, we made for example, the stargazing program, which is just a live thing over 3 nights, very straightforward, 3 hours. And that was very successful. It had over 3 million viewers in that slot, again, on BBC Two. So yeah, to recognise that this genre is not a niche genre, it's actually a prime time, big ratings thing, I think is hopefully what's changed.